This boat is a wreck. But for the right person, maybe it's worth it. The Hans Christian boats are amazing. Blue water, ocean going, world traveling, floating homes that can ride out a gale as comfortably as a Coupe de Ville. But can you get one cheap, like really cheap? One that needs some work? Can you invest your time and skills and sweat equity, as it were, to bring an old crappy boat back from the dead and end up with $120,000 worth of cruiser? This week on Everything You Need to Know, is this boat garbage? I do a lot of consulting, talking to people who are buying boats, and sometimes a really interesting boat pops up and I can't help but to want to tell you guys about it. And this happened yesterday. We were looking at this boat and wondering, is it worth it? Buying a cheap version of an amazing boat and literally fixing everything. Our boat in question today is a Hans Christian 38T. And to understand what I'm on about, I'm going to show you a good one first. The 38T, or traditional, was designed by Harwood Ives and built from 1976 to 1989 in Taiwan, where a lot of interesting boats seem to come from. And don't be scared off by a boat built overseas. These guys have some of the best woodwork and joinery in the business, as well as fiberglass layup that stood the test of time. There's still thousands of these boats out plying the world's oceans. They made 167 of this boat, and it is a full keel world cruiser. She came in a cutter rig with a very powerful sail plan, and it weighs, near as makes no difference, 30,000 pounds. For a 38-footer, that's a lot of blue water ocean going weight, so you can be darn sure that she's a comfortable boat. But that's not why people love Hans Christians. Sure, they're super capable cruising boats, but they love them because of how they look. A classic double-ender adorned with half a forest of teak, the quintessential classic traditional sailboat, and truly one of the most beautiful boats still out there plying those tropical waters in the Caribbean. Pulling into an anchorage in one of these, you'll immediately be the center of attention, and that's before you even open that gorgeous butterfly hatch and start oiling your teak work, which you'll be doing a lot when you own one of these boats. Inside these, it's really hard to outdo a Hans, with expert level joinery in the wood and a layout that people seem to love. Imagine this showing up on the sailing scene back in 1976 when people were still rocking up in albergs and Cape Dories. This is the royalty of cruising luxury, and it still holds up today as one of the most beautiful interiors that you can find. You even get an aft private cabin and a V-berth that's actually big enough for two people to sleep in, a nice-sized and safe galley that you can use while you're underway, and a massive saloon area to live in while you're at anchor. And of course, none of this would be all too surprising in a 45-foot yacht, but they did all this in 38 feet. How they got all this space and gorgeousness in here is nothing short of some sort of witchcraft. This boat we're looking at now is listed for 130 grand, and you can easily see why. People love these things, and for good reason, and it will sell for near what they're asking because it's just worth it. But what if you don't have 130 grand to throw at a 40-year-old sailboat? Can you find one of these masterpieces on the cheap that needs some work and pick it up cheap? Is it even worth doing that? While you're here, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button on this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Both are free for you and would really mean the world to me. As it turns out, there is a cheap 38T on the market right now, and on the surface, it looks like it needs some work. They're asking 37 grand for it, and it's in California right now, which, as most of us know, is basically the most expensive place to own a sailboat outside of Mars. And it's sitting in what looks like a nice marina, so I would expect that they're fairly motivated to sell it. This thing is nickel and diming them to death every month. On the surface, the pictures of this boat look pretty good, but The more we look at it, the more problems start to sort of jump out at us. First, the teak work on the deck is looking less than good. Not only is it fading out and in poor repair, but when we look closely, we start to see chunks of it missing in fairly bad spots that need attention right away. I also see a manual windlass on the bow that is old enough that we'll likely never be able to get parts for it, and I promise you your windlass will break. It's just how cruising life goes. And that may seem like it's okay. We can just put a new manual windlass on it for $1,000, but consider this. That wheel on this old windlass that holds the chain, it's called a gypsy. And these are sized specifically to interact with a certain size of chain. And looking at this picture, I suspect it's 3/8 chain. But to what standard? Is it BBB anchor chain? Is it HT? Is it G4? Is it HT4? I bet this boat has 200 feet of whatever chain that is. And if our new windlass doesn't have a gypsy available to fit that chain, we'll be replacing the chain too. So there's another $2,000. Now, at this point, I want to apologize to all the Hans Christian lovers out there, but my job yesterday was to rip this boat apart and make sure it's worth the effort. So that's what we're doing. In this picture, I took note of the main sheet blocks. Here we like to see Harkin or something strong and easily serviceable, but what we have are the original wooden blocks. Yes, wooden. And I'm sure they look great all oiled up, but I would set them aside as sort of a showpiece and install something for the day-to-day use that's a bit more reliable before I took her out in the blue water. And these blocks need to be beefy, so we're looking at probably $1,000 in this picture. Here's another picture that scares me. And while we look at all these, I want you to take a note to try and count the screw holes in the deck of this boat, because we're likely going to have to rebed and seal every single one of them. The coach top roof here of this boat seems to have a lot of marks in the glass, especially right in front of the mast. I'm not sure if this is just cosmetic scratches or stress cracks, but I suspect we're going to be doing a lot of glass work on this thing. Oh, and by screws in the deck, in this picture I count 48, and that doesn't include the handrails. Something weird on this boat too is the compass is missing. I've never seen a sailboat missing its compass unless the boat was being stripped down to be scrapped. So it's curious why this is missing here. Did someone steal it, or were they tearing this boat down and selling the parts? A good pedestal mount compass is about $500, and we're going to need to get one. There are some very big problems with this boat, and we'll get to those, but let's head inside first. Here we get all the beautiful Hans Christianness of this boat, and it looks great if we ignore whatever's going on with the sink and the fact that someone also made off with the stove. A new 3-burner is only about $2,000, so we're going to be fine, right? In the aft cabin, we have some water damage on the cushions, so we can and should assume that basically everything leaks on this boat. We should also try to count the screw holes in the ceiling while we're in here, and note that the wires here on the back of the gauges have all been cut. The main saloon looks pretty good, and the upholstery looks a bit newer, which is nice. And all the cabinetry and joinery is still in great shape here. And then we get to the head. They've replaced the old Jabsco head with a nature's head, and I for one love this. I can go on and on endlessly about how much I adore the nature's head toilet, but they don't pay me to do that, so we're just going to gloss over it. My wonder here in this picture is, did they also remove the black water system when they put in the composting toilet? They should have, but judging by the rest of this boat, I have a suspicion that they just capped off the black water tank and left it to rot, which is not only scary, but a pretty big health hazard. I'd really like to know about that, and if they left it in, we're going to have to deal with it, and getting a 40-year-old black water toilet tank out of a boat is a crappy job. You usually have to cut it up in its location to fit it out of the boat, and I'm guessing that you can probably imagine how messy that work is. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make these videos possible. The mission at Lady K has always been to get more people sailing more easily. If you'd like to help out, please consider becoming a patron. And a big shout out to all the existing patrons who make this all possible. I really couldn't do it without you guys, and you're all amazing, and I love you. This picture is where things get expensive. What you're looking at here, if you ignore all the silly yellow spray paint, is a 1976 Nissan diesel 4-cylinder engine and an unknown amount of hours on it, and its running condition is unknown. This is where our lives are going to get difficult. We're also going to try to ignore all of the auto parts store cheap as chips crimp-on electrical connectors with no heat shrink on them. We're going to have to deal with that, but let's ignore them for now. This boat is a world cruiser, and we're certainly not going to leave it sitting at the dock. It's also a complete battleship, so we're going to be out in some rougher than average conditions on her. So we need an engine that's both extremely strong and reliable. And this yellow relic is not going to cut it, even if it does run and somehow still has reasonable compression, which I'm kind of betting it doesn't. We can shop around here and we can get a rebuilt diesel for about 10 grand. And we're going to be shrewd negotiators about it and try to get it for 10 grand, but installing it won't be easy. Not to mention the add-on parts we're sure to need, like exhaust and a fuel system and new gauges and electrics. This is going to be a $20,000 plus problem, no matter how we slice it. But they're only asking $37,000 for the boat, so replacing the engine might be acceptable. So let's talk about the other two things I include when I refer to the big three. Those three most expensive things to watch for. The engine being the first, and the second and third being sails and standing rigging, which of course, this boat needs both of. In a couple of the pictures, we can see the head sails and how discolored they are, and maybe I'm just being negative now, but judging by the condition of the rest of the boat and the Yacht World ad giving us little to no details, we're just going to have to assume here that we're going to be looking for sails pretty soon. And for a big cutter rig like this, the least we're going to be spending here is about 10 grand on new Dacron, though maybe even more. And the standing rigging, assuming it's likely at least 20 years old, another 10 grand at least there. Remember, this is an offshore boat, and it can, in good shape, handle just about anything the ocean throws at it, so the rigging had better be able to keep us safe. In something of a personal side note, do you know why all cruising boats carry bolt cutters? It's interesting. If the rigging were to break, it'll happen at the worst possible time. It won't be sitting at anchor. It'll be out in 20 to 30 knots of wind with huge waves. And without a doubt, the mast will come down when the rigging goes. And that may seem possibly like a non-life-threatening situation, but what happens next is kind of scary. When you snap a stay in violent conditions, the mast falls down and into the water. The existing stays that aren't broken, though, will pull the mast back in toward the boat. And when the end of the mast hits a fiberglass hull, it'll poke right through it like a hot knife into butter, and the boat will be skewered by it. And then you'll sink. That's why we have bolt cutters. When the mast comes down, you have to cut the remaining stays very quickly, or you risk losing the whole boat. So back to the Hans Christian. We know it'll need the big three: sails, rigging, and engine. Let's conservatively call that 50 grand all said. If nothing else were wrong, that might be worth doing. But on top of that, it needs literally everything else. The glass in the deck is all banged up and cracked. The teak is in bad shape and may need to be ripped up entirely, backfilling thousands of screw holes. I'll bet every window leaks, the blocks and the sail hardware. Absolutely zero electrics like lights or batteries, and zero electronics, not even a compass. The only thing that this boat has going for it is the sunbrella covers that somebody made for just about everything on the deck. And the fact that if we bought her for 37 grand and sunk about 100 grand into her, she could be a $130,000 boat. In the end, I don't like double-ender canoe sterns anyway, because they're too hard to go cruising on. There's no room for dinghy davits, solar panels, wind turbines. Very hard to get into from the water because of that side boarding ladder that you have to use. And the tight back end means a smaller than usual cockpit and a small interior in the aft. Asking if this boat is worth the $37,000 that they're asking for seems silly to me. I think the real question is, would you take it if they offered it to you for 15? That's it for this week, guys. If you need help buying a boat and you want to book an hour of my time, head over to ladyksailing.com/consults. Also, can I ask that you please leave a comment on this video about what the next episode should be on? Until next week, friends, keep the heavy side down, but not too far down. We'll see ya.